All right, guys, so this is going to be the video on the pop art as far as starting the assignment. We already did this part, so I already just said that right now as far as doing the outline. However, we're gonna go ahead and start with the actual process of the painting part of it, okay? So there are a couple of things I do need to go over before we actually put the paint here so that I can explain some of the background colors and so forth. If you have not yet come up with what you want to do for your background as far as patterns, this is the time to start thinking about it. You know, I kind of already mentioned, if you guys want to Google some images of pop art, just so you can kind of get some ideas, things that you'll probably more than likely find for backgrounds in pop art are going to be like the polka dots, the checkerboard pattern, stripe patterns. So it's more about patterns, if anything, just to kind of to replicate movement and to be able to use colors within contrasting colors to be able to capture the attention of the viewer. Now, what a lot of people do, and if you guys go back and look at some of the images that my friend Chelsea, the artist from South Padre Island, what she would do a lot is use the contrasting color on the background compared to what the actual animal is going to be. So for the pets, for instance, if it's got the black, for some of the highlights, some of the midtones, it's not going to be black. We're going to be using like blues and stuff to kind of enhance the color. There will be some black, but it's going to have more of those bright pop of colors that is consistent of pop art. So we'll be using like blues and so forth for the majority, and the black. Probably in the white, we're going to be using a little bit of some yellow tones and so forth. So that's already more or less contrasting there. Even though technically blue and orange are the contrasting colors opposite on the color wheel, they're still close enough, the yellow and orange, to be able to pop already with that. So knowing that the majority of this is going to have like the blues, like on those little areas of the shadow, if I wanted to use orange for the background, I can, or orange and yellow for the background, I can. But because I know for the white, I'm going to want to be using some of that yellow. That's why I want to stay away from the yellow in the background, unless it's going to be part of the actual checkerboard part, while using the major color orange over here on these areas. Now, when I took this photo originally, you'll notice that I do have the area over here where it has already like the block from the tile that's in the backyard that I have there on the porch. So you can kind of see that. I actually like that look. So I do want to incorporate it. Now, the angle I actually took it, I wasn't 100% happy with it. But again, I wasn't focusing on the background at this point. When I took this photograph, I was focusing on Lily. So because of that, I want to make sure that I almost exaggerate the lines. Like it's more going to be more about the placement rather than the actual pattern itself. Excuse me. So what I mean by that, if you look at the line, it goes like this, right? What I mean by exaggerating is I want to kind of stretch the line just a little bit further this way. So that way, when I put these lines, they'll be more like this. And that way I can get a couple of them and it'll just enhance the pattern. So I'm going to get a ruler, which I have here next to me. So that way, when I start with the pattern, again, I'm going to exaggerate it. So I'm just giving myself a guide. So as I start with the painting itself, I can follow the lines a little bit easier. So at this point, what I'm going to end up doing, and let me just copy and paste this really quick, just because I got a message on Google Classroom and I want to make sure that they do come in. Okay, so going back to the lines, I just want to make sure that the original line, if I'm looking at it, would be something like this. So if I'm going to exaggerate, I'm going to exaggerate it maybe about this much here. So I'm just going to draw just a couple of lines and I want to make sure that I follow. I want to make sure that it's the same. So I'm just going to follow it like here. And then I can probably fit one more down here. Now this one looks a little bit closer. So just to be on the safe side, I'm going to actually measure it. So this one would fall somewhere at about 3 3/4. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. So that way the squares stay the same. So if you're not 100% sure, then use a ruler. If you don't have a ruler, and like how I went like this and I measured it, Even if I have just something that's flat like that, I can always just make a mark. So when I come over here, I know that it's going to be the same over here on this side, okay? And then I can do the same thing going this way just to make sure. So I would have my other line. I would have one more going in this direction. So I'm going to erase this one because that one was too big for me. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to take it across this way. And I'm just gonna, as far as placement wise, just because I want to see a little bit of the line over here on this side of her head, just so I can get that kind of like squared feel to it, I'm just gonna make sure that I can see it on both sides. And then I just use that same mark that I did on the other one just to kind of make sure that it's squared up. I'm gonna do this here. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. Just mark here so I know how far to take the line. I'm only going to see it on this part because I don't see any more over here. Okay. So at this time, now that I know that, I'm going to go ahead and start with my background first. So for the goal today, because we're going to set ourselves goals on painting, I'm only going to concentrate on the background. Now, I told you guys that I know for the black area, which is the majority of the part, because it's going to hit here, here, as well as some over here, it's going to have a lot of blues. So I want more oranges for the background, kind of like a reddish orange. I kind of like the color here. If you've ever seen those tiles that I have over here in the background, they kind of have like a reddish pink look to them. So I think a red orange would look good, honestly, for this. So I'm going to go ahead and stick to the same. And then I'm going to vibrate with the colors for the lines because I do want it to have some kind of contrast. So I think what I'll end up doing, like I said, blue is with the orange, but I do like that yellow. I don't want to put a lot of it because I don't want it to get lost with the yellow that I'm going to be placing in the white of the fur. But I wouldn't mind doing something like a thick blue line with like a yellow in between that'll help vibrate in between each other. So because you want to work from the background to the foreground, especially since we're using acrylic, I still have my glass of water next to me so that way I can make sure that the paint will move. But I know I'm going to need some red because I don't have any more red. Yellow and blue are still wet at this point because I have had it in the, I have had it like inside my plastic baggie. So these are still good, but I know I'm going to need some red. So I'm going to go ahead and apply red here. Okay, and then at this point, I'm going to pick, as far as the brush, I am going to get a more flat brush. And I'm actually going to pick one that's a little bit larger, just so I can fill more of the space. Now, there's different ways of doing pop art, guys. So it really depends on you on what style you want. Because if you go and you look at it, there are some pop artists that do get a more textured look in their paintings. And then there are the traditional pop artists where they try to get the color as flat as possible. I always struggled with that. I am a type of person who I love to do transitions and realism and all this other stuff. And usually for the most part, I'm not one to try to get flat colors, but because this is pop art, I'm going to try my best to not put as much texture because technically, if you think about it with pop art, and especially if you pay attention to my artist friend, Chelsea Fettigan. So if you guys want to look her up on Instagram, so you want to look up Chelsea Fettigan for the name, CHELSEA for the Chelsea, and then Fettigan is FEDIGAN, Fettigan. And you can look her up on Instagram. If you Google her name, her images as far as for the artwork does come out. So you can find a lot of her stuff as well. If you want to see what she does with backgrounds and things like that to get ideas for your own. But if you look, there are some stuff with transitions and then a lot of stuff also with flat. So you can go both ways because she does introduce the two different types as far as the varieties of styles, okay? With mine, I'm going to add a little bit of transition, but not a lot because like I said, I like it. And then usually the artwork that I've seen with pop art, I like it when they have the majority of it flat, okay? So what I'm gonna do for my background, again, you can do yours different, but I'm just trying to give you an idea if you're gonna do something like checkerboard and so forth. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix some of the red and yellow first. So I'm gonna mix some of my red paint over here in the middle. Put some in there. Try to remove as much as I can from my brush first before I even touch the yellow. And then I'm going to clean my brush. Try to take off as much as I can. Dip it in the water after, because I don't want to get my water dirty. So if I remove as much as I can first prior to going into the paint, then I'm not, or the water, excuse me, I'm not going to get my water completely dirty, okay? Now that I have it more or less clean, I'm going to get some of the yellow. And it's still wet enough to where I can mix it with my red and then make more of an orange. Probably going to need a little bit more yellow, but I'm going to first mix whatever I can in there. So I do have to work it a little bit just because it had been sitting there for a while. So the yellow is not 100% dry, but if I work it, just so I save my paint, I can get it to work, and you can see it starting to change color now that it's actually mixing. Remove as much as I can so that way I don't waste paint. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean my brush off again to rinse it, just to make sure that I don't dirty my yellow paint. Then I'm going to grab more of my yellow and start mixing it some more into the red to make it a little bit lighter. So once I have the color that I want, as far as for that orangey tone that I'm looking for, this is kind of a good color. I kind of like that it's not too orange. It still has a hint of the red in there. Kind of like the tile, other than, of course, adding, I would have to add a white to it if I wanted to match that more of that tile color. But I like this color, and I think it's going to contrast really well with the blues that I'm going to be using. So once you're happy with the color, then I can go ahead and start applying it. Now, if you look at my brush, you can kind of see that there's still some red yellows in there. That's okay. Like I said, I'm going to try to get it as even as possible. If it doesn't come out as even when you're applying your paint, then you might want to make sure that you mix it a little bit better, especially clean your brush off. But if I get a couple of strokes on there, it's not going to be a big deal because mine's going to be where I'm going to add the blue line as well as yellow onto there. Okay, so right now I'm just going to go ahead and try my best to get it as even as I can. If your paint is not moving good enough, that's because you need a little bit of water in your brush. So put just a tiny bit of water and then come back and pick up more paint. And I'm just going to keep applying. I'm going to try my best to go around Lily. So wherever I have the ear placement, I don't really want to get too much of this paint on there, this color. So I'm going to try to work around the contour. The contour is where you should take your time. Now, remember, I did mention that I still have to do all the fur detail to Lily. So I will be adding some paint on top of the orange, but I just want to make sure that I get it as even as possible. My contour is not that great. Like if you can see that, like if I get closer, you can kind of see that it's not straight. If you want it straight already automatically, because that's going to be your final coat, then that's fine. But remember, I told you guys that you should work from the background to the foreground for this particular reason, because then you only have to take time on one of them rather than doing both of them. So if I work on the background color, I just have to make sure that it is even as far as the coats within it. So if you kind of see, you can kind of see some of the brush strokes. I'm going to let it sit for a little bit, let it dry, and then come back with that same color on top one more time. Okay. So what I'll do for the meantime is keep filling the other squares. So I'm going to leave a little white line in between. So I'm just going to go around it. And I have my newspaper there, so it's okay if I accidentally go a little bit off the side because that's protecting it. It's the whole purpose of having your newspaper. And then I'm gonna go up direction just to make sure that it comes out clean. And then, like I said, I haven't added the fur detail. So what I'll do is I'll just come in with a couple of strokes like this, because I will go back and add more detail after, once it's dry. So I do want to be careful because this paint's going to be wet and I'm going to start making a mess. So I'm just going to get a piece of napkin just to place it on top so I don't make too much of a mess. That's why napkins are very important to have off to the side. So I'm going to start giving it another coat. If it's still wet, I don't recommend giving it a coat just yet. Let it dry a little bit more, just because if not, you're going to be picking up the color rather than placing the color. So I'm just going to put a couple more strokes on top of this one since it looks dry in that area. And then one right here. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat this process on every single one of those squares that I'm going to be doing the square pattern to, leaving the white line that falls in between. But basically you don't want to see texture in here. So if you see your brush strokes, like you see how I turn it and I can still see, that means I need another layer in there. So this is where you're going to take your time and make sure that you add some of the patterns and keeping the contours clean. So I'll go back and I'll do it again to this one. And then I'm going to do it to the box on the top, the side, and then as well as the one over here towards the bottom. And you can see that I'm lifting my paper a little bit, just so that way I don't run the risk of dirtying the area over here, because you can see that it will drop the excess paint on the bottom. So be very careful when you get to that. So there are some, now that it's drying, you can kind of tell the areas that still need another coat. So I'll go back on some of those areas just to add one more coat so it gets a little bit thicker of a paint. Same thing for this one right here. And then I'm going to turn this around so I can work on the opposite side. Remember, your papers are not glued to your desk. So if you guys feel more comfortable in one direction versus another one, then move your paper around. I remember when I was in the painting class over at college, I used to flip my paintings all the time when I was painting. I mean, some people would look at me like, what's wrong with this girl? But I mean, it's not glued to the actual, you know, the canvas is not glued to the easels. So if you guys want to move it around, it's whatever you can accomplish within the time frame, because I mean, we used to have to do those paintings very quickly. And they were big paintings. So whatever makes it more comfortable for you, depending on sometimes if you're right-handed or left-handed will make a difference on the comfortability for actually the way that it's sitting and so forth. So whatever's more comfortable for you, just move it so that way you can get those little areas painted and set. So I'm lifting the canvas a little bit so that way I can take it off to the edge. Now, if you are trying to do a coat and you're getting little areas that are coming up and they're not sticking, it's because you're applying the paint while the paint underneath is still wet. You have to let it dry 100% before you come back with that other coat. So if you notice that it's hard to kind of get that coat on there, like you're touching it and then all of a sudden it's coming off, is because that paint is still wet. Wait till it dries before you apply it, okay? So I'm gonna turn it around this way because I'm still missing one over here down on the bottom that I have to add. So I'm going to add some of this first because how it's underneath, it'll create a little shadow. And then I'll put the orange towards the top. So if you want to do some transitions, all it is just applying a little bit of the darker color underneath. And that way, when you put the brush stroke on top together, you're going to get the double color. So if we're looking at that, like over here by this time, this is like where her leg is going to be. So I just need to make sure that this little part gets a little bit of the color. And then this square, I'm still missing it. So this has to have some of that orange. I already have red on the other side, so I'm just going to try my best to, with whatever paint I have of the orange, try to like concentrate on the contours, guys, because it's the contours that you want to make sure that are straight. Now, technically, even though this is the background, and I'm going to paint on top of it to clean up the contours, you still want to try your best to get it as close as possible. So that way it's a little bit easier when you come around with the next step, okay? So I'm going to wash my brush a little bit. Take off some of the paint. Try to get my brush as clean as possible. Still has some paint, but I mean, it's enough to be able to adjust the next step. So at this point, if you are getting textures, like if I kind of go like this off to the side, you can kind of see some of the hint that it does need another layer, but I'm happy with the color that I got on this one. If again, you're going by traditional like pop art, that should be 100% as flat as possible. So I should go back and add one more layer on top of it, but I will be adding a little bit of transitions on mine at the very end. You know, for those people that don't want to be traditional pop art, like 100%. But I'm going to leave mine at like that at this point, because I know, like I said, I'm going to be adding some effects to it. So I know that I'm going to have blue in the black, but what I want to end up doing for the lines on this one is I'm actually going to do blue with a pop of yellow. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to get the blue paint. Of course, make sure that your brushes are clean first, and that, especially since this blue's been sitting, I dipped my brush first into the water before I pick up the blue, okay? And what I'll end up doing is I'm going to use this for my contours. So this is the part that I'm gonna have to really take my time and make sure that it's straight. Now, I would switch, like honestly, like I would probably use this brush rather than this one for this step, just because of the thickness of the lines. But because I have blue on here, I'll go ahead and I'll use it. So if this is the only kind of brush that you have, if you don't have this kind of brush, the one that's a little bit more easier to manipulate, then what you want to do is you want to go where you use this part of the brush and take it to the side. So if you only have this style of brush, this is what you would do to get that same look, where you push it, drag it along without stopping. And of course, you're going to have to do a couple of layers because of the type of blue that this one is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slow it down, make sure that I'm concentrating on that contour and taking it out to get that fine line, okay? If you only have this kind of brush. So I do have the other brush available to me. So I'm going to go ahead and do this so that way my paper doesn't get dirty. And I'm switching over to this particular brush. I'm going to dip it in the water just so that way I can manipulate the blue a little bit first. And that way, when I do my coat on this one, this is going to be a little bit easier to manipulate. And I'm going to keep that brush as fine as possible when I drag it over, okay? You want to be consistent with it. So The way you hold it too also makes a big difference. What I learned, which helped me a lot in painting at the college, you can use, of course, on the areas that are dry, but you can use your pinky as a guide, like to hold and balance. So for those of you guys that struggle with doing lines in painting, it has to be a dry surface. So if it's not 100% dry, mine is pretty much dry, but I'm gonna put it just to be on the safe side. And what you do is you hold your pinky on a surface. So like, let's say, okay, well, this part doesn't have any paint, so maybe I don't need to cover it. You put your pinky here as you draw your line, so that way you're up on the top, okay? And you can still balance. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this just because I don't wanna hurt the rest of the painting. And I'm just gonna drag it along here. But for those of you guys that struggle with doing this kind of straight lines, I do recommend that you use your pinky, okay? Only if the surface is dry. So if you have to wait a little bit for the surface to dry before you start placing your pinky down, so be it. Just watch the rest of this if you're working with lines, and then you can take your time as you finish it. Now, the contour is the thing you have to be the most careful with. So what you want it to look like, and I'll show you on this one, you want it to be as straight as possible. So I would work one side first, which is the opposite side this way. Then I would turn my paper in the opposite direction when I'm gonna work with the contour in the opposite side of that line. So that way, as I get my blue paint, I'm going to start from this way, that way, and I'm only going to concentrate on the line that sits on the outside. So for those of you guys that struggle with contours, you want to make sure that you're not working on both contours at the same time. If it's a line like this, work on one side first and then the opposite side after. And that'll help you get those really nice, straight, defined lines. Now on mine, I am going to also have a second color on the line. I'm not going to just do the blue. I want that pop of yellow. I'm just making sure my contours are straight before I move on. And then I'll do the same and repeat to all of the lines. Now, you guys might not be doing this. You guys might have decided, no, I want checkerboard. I saw Chelsea's and hers are checkerboard. And if you pay attention to some of her checkerboard patterns for her backgrounds, she has some that are just solid color. So it's just a solid polka dot. Then she also has some that have transitions in it. So depending on which style you're going, if it's going to be a flat color, like the way I'm doing it as of right now, just make sure your contours are nice and clean. So if you're doing circles, you really have to pay attention to that. Now, if you pay attention to this one right here, you see a little bit of the background color, which means I need a second coat on this. I'm going to be placing a color in the middle. And I'm also going to be adding some little effects, which you'll see. So if you don't necessarily want to be super clean with those lines, this is an option for you, which I'll show you after, of course, I go over applying all of the blue lines, but I do have to do all of the blue lines first before I can show you that, okay? So let me just concentrate on finishing up some of it. I won't do the bottom, if anything, because I can always go back and finish it on my own. But just for the sake of the video, I'm just going to finish up a couple of these spots because you should see it in its entirety. I shouldn't just do one little section just because it might be confusing to you. You're not going to understand what I'm trying to do at the very end, okay? So let me first go ahead and work this little area out here. Now, if you already know what you're going to do as far as color, you guys already know I want to do orange and blue because I like the way Ms. Palmeras is doing it. It looks awesome. I like those colors. Okay, we'll start painting yours on those sections if that's the case. If you're not happy, let's say you want purples and yellows for your background or whatever, then go ahead and start painting those areas if you know that that's what it's going to be. But you should be working from your background. You shouldn't be working on your animal just yet. So right now I'm just concentrating on making those lines as straight as possible. So I'm concentrating on that side. Now I'm going to concentrate on this side. And like I said, by the looks of mine, I know it needs another coat. I know it does, in order for it to look like a solid blue. But one, I don't have the patience to wait for it to dry for me to give it the other coat. And two, I know I'm going to add a second color. So I'm just putting enough coats just so where it looks like a straight line. But if you want yours a solid color, then just let it dry a little bit and add another coat. So right now I'm concentrating on the top line being straight, and now I'm going to concentrate on the bottom of the line. Oh, yeah, go for it. I'm only looking at it like this because I want to make sure that it looks like it would be connecting. So I'm going to make this bottom one just a little bit thicker so that it makes sense with my line that's coming from the other side. And it won't take me very long to do these. So let me just do them real fast just to make sure that it gets all done, since I'm working with the blue, so I don't have to wash my brush again. I'm taking it off here because I noticed that I had accidentally picked up a little bit of the red, that orangey color. So I just want to make sure that my brush doesn't get dirty. So I did tell you guys the last time that with pop art, they use a lot of contrasting colors because of the fact being that it will grab the attention of the viewer a lot faster, hence the word pop. It pops out at you, okay? That's one of the reasons. Even though technically pop art is more because the whole word of popular culture, as far as the topics that are used for the types of painting, because we have other artists like Jasper Johns and so forth that does like the American flag. And his are sometimes the red, white, and blue. It has nothing to do with the pop of color. So it's not necessarily about that, but that's one of the actual references for the term pop, depending, of course, on how the artist uses it. Okay, so it's up to you of how you want to do this. I mean, if you wanted to not use the super bright colors, technically it could still be considered pop art, just depending on how you guys paint it at the end. But I know I'm going to want to use that pop of color, because usually the artwork that I pick, that I'm like, oh, I really like this pop artist, I really like this, because a lot of the times it's the color that really gets my attention. So I know I for sure want to use the stuff that pops. So if you look at this already, I know it's more of a red orange, but it still counts. You have the red orange against the blue, which is already a pop of color. But now, because again, we're only concentrating on the background today, we're not going to concentrate on the dogs just yet, or a cat, whichever you guys decided to do. I think I had somebody else wanted to do a pig and so forth. So whatever animal you ended up choosing as your pet, what I'm going to end up doing, again, is just background today. We'll start with the pets the next class. Now, I'm not done with this background. If you're happy with it just like that, then leave it just like that. But I know I want to add just a little bit more of a contrasting color to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit more yellow, and I'm going to show you another thing that you can possibly do if you want. So, so I'm gonna get a little bit of white here. Now I still have white, but it's a little bit dry. So I'm getting extra just to be on the safe side. So I don't have to manipulate it too much because if not, it'll take me too much time to be able to do that. Cut that off so it doesn't damage my paint. And then I'm gonna get just a little bit of yellow. And so this is another option for those of you guys that don't want to have to be doing layer upon layer upon layer, especially because I'm gonna put the yellow in the middle. I'm gonna put a stripe of it on the blue. I'm not gonna make it a solid line. It's gonna be more of like those break lines. So what I'm gonna do first is put a little bit of white as a primer first before I put the yellow on top. Because if I try to put that yellow on the blue, the yellow's a very, what's the word? Like a see-through color. So if I put that on top, you're gonna see some of the blue come up. So what I'll do first is do the white as a primer. So this one might be solid up to here, and then it's a break. It's called a break line where you get up and then continue it a little bit. Maybe it stops right there. I'm gonna do it also on this way. So I'm gonna do another break line. So I'll put a small one here, and then it breaks. It comes across this way. Remember, see, I'm using my pinky as a guide. So you can see that's called a break line. It's not a solid line. And then I'll do the same thing over here. So I'm going to put a little one here, stop, pick it up, come here. And then again on this side. So on every single one, I'm just going to figure out where I think the break would look good. Sometimes it might just be, oh, my hands are tired. I can't hold it anymore. So you'll just stop painting. That could be your break line. That's fine. If you're like, okay, well, I'm going to just go as far as I can, as steady as I can, as steady as I can. Oh, my fingers are hurting. Okay, stop, take a break. Okay, so now I know I'm going to continue. So I'll leave a little spot open. So if you want to do that, you want to do a couple of them, you can do it like that, where you have a few. Maybe it comes up there. So basically, it's just a line that it's not consistent, okay? So I'm doing the white first. And then once the white dries, then I'll go ahead and I'll put some of that yellow on it. And then because I have the white, my yellow is gonna look like an actual yellow and not a variation of the blue. I'll put one there. My paint is actually on the blue, still a little bit wet right here. So on purpose, I'm gonna come up and come this way so that way I don't go on the wet blue. So that might be a reason why you might wanna leave a break in those spots. And notice that I did switch brushes. I didn't mention that. So I did switch the brush to a smaller brush because I knew I wanted it in the center, okay? So now that I know this side is dry, I'm gonna go back to this side, start on this side while that other side dries. And I'm gonna pick up the yellow, and all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go on top of my white. Now, what happens if you go here and you're like, no, but I like the way the white looks? Okay, well then just let the yellow dry, go back on top of it with the white. It's really whatever you guys are more drawn to. I like the yellow, so I'm gonna keep going with the yellow. Now, what you could do is go back with the yellow, so just to make sure that it's yellow first, and then put some highlights on the yellow. So you can put little hints of white if you want. If you really like the way the white looked up against the blue. I just know I want mine with a lot of color. So, and I'm not finished yet. This is just one of the things. I'm actually gonna add a little bit of detail on the orange as well. So this project in general with pop art, guys, what you're gonna be concentrating, I think, the most on is gonna be your contours, like keeping straight lines, keeping things look solid as far as color, which some people that are used to transitions, like I said, I struggled with that a lot in college because I was so used to doing transitions that when I moved to these assignments where they had to be more solid colors, oh my gosh, it was torture for me. So it is a good practice because it does help you make your contours just that much better. Okay, so now that I have my yellow, I know that I want to add some more texture to it on these parts. So I'm gonna add some filler colors. So I know I like the orange, but I do want a hint more of red. So I'm gonna take my red and do the same thing that I did with the break lines, but now only apply it to the edges of my squares. So I'm just gonna go here and just leave a little gap in between, still do the break lines. If I want that if I want the red to be just a little bit, I know I am hungry, right? It's the lack of carbs, chihuahuas. So I'm gonna end up applying the break, but if I want that red to be a lot brighter of a color, then I would do the same thing. Add the white first and then put the red on top. And then you'll see the red very, very bright in tone, okay? Now, I do recommend, if you're gonna be doing the break lines, don't follow it exactly like the yellow. Like, don't do line, break right there, line, line, break, and then line. Don't follow it. You want it to be just a little bit off, just because it will help to vibrate. So if it's not exactly on the same, it will vibrate and get the viewer the attention just a lot stronger, okay? And then I'm also gonna go ahead and maybe do a second one on this one, just because I want more vibration. And the more that I put these little textures, the more it will vibrate for the eyes. So I'll put a third one on this side. And then maybe I'll do just a few on the top. I don't think I would do it to all of it. You could, like if I wanted to do 3 lines on all of them, but I want it to kind of fade out. I'm gonna put a 4th one there. So that way, when you look at it like this, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. It's just gonna be like a little hint. And so these are little things that you guys can do to yours. Not necessary, you don't have to. If you like if, look at this, and then let me cover that. If you like this look better, you're like, no, I like that it's very clean. Leave it like that, you know, it's whatever you decide. So you get to choose on this one of what looks better to you. I'm just showing you different techniques when it comes to the pop art, okay? So I do want you to play around with it. Just remember, this is acrylic. So let's say you add this and you're like, I don't like that. I don't like the way that looks. I liked it better flat. Then take the same color. That's why you always mix a little bit more just in case. Let it dry, cover it on top, add another coat right now while it's wet, so that way it disappears on you, okay? So just kind of work it back and forth. If let's say you do the yellow, I don't know what color you guys are using at home, but let's just say you do the yellow and you're like, I don't like the yellow. Maybe it would look cool, but with like a purple. This is the time to get it done. And all you're doing is working on your background. Now, be aware that on Google Classroom, I am gonna put an assignment on there under the classwork, and it's gonna be titled Background for Pop Art. So when you finish the background, take a picture of it and submit it, because you're getting a test grade just for the background only. So each section that we do is gonna be a test grade for this one, okay, for the 6 weeks. So even though you're like, we did the background, but we still have time, I wanna get more done, it's better if we do this little by little, so that way your paintings come out good, okay? So only concentrate on the background. There's still about a good 20 minutes left till the next class, guys. So just do what you can, touch-ups, whatever you need to, so that way it's finished. So when you guys come on Wednesday, we'll start the base coat, because we're gonna do this in coats so that it comes out right. We'll start the base coat with the animals, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and end the video there.